if you fly in the back of the plane, and occasionally you get bumped up to first class because of you float, you fly light or whatever, that bump up, the satisfaction of the bump up is going to be so much fun. It's going to be so exciting.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to get Sprite in the cup. You're going to get some warm nuts. You're going to get to pick your feet back. It's going to be this great adventure for you. And you're going to remember that. It's like, oh, what a great flight.
Yeah.
Right? In a sea of business travel.
Yep.
On the other hand, if you fly up front all the time, you lose that magic very quickly. And the inconveniences of, well, these nuts aren't warm enough. There's not enough ice in my Sprite. A plastic glass. Right?
Can't believe it.
Welcome to the third season of Land and Everything Else. I'm here with my friend and coworker, colleague, Donovan Sanchez. Donovan, thanks for making it on the podcast.
It's a pleasure, Craig. Thanks for having me.
It's been a while. I've been wanting to chat with you, and you've been busy getting your doctorate and teaching and working in a wealth firm and all the things you do.
Very busy.
Us. Why don't you introduce yourself? Say what you do for a living and all that.
Sure. Yeah. So as Craig was mentioning, the last few years have been pretty busy. Prior to joining the University of Illinois, I operated a very small financial planning practice. And for a period of time at the university, thought that I could be both a full-time instructor as well as run and operate my own firm, which turned out to not actually be possible for someone like me. And so long story short, about a year and a half ago, joined another firm called Model Wealth. So that alleviated some of the business admin strain that existed there, and began the pursuit of a PhD in personal financial planning out of Kansas State University. But my real passion is here at the University of Illinois, where I teach in our financial planning program. I love working with our students and helping educate the next generation of financial advisors. It's really fulfilling work.
Well, I'm really happy we were able to snag some of your time today, as it is very hard get with all your got going on. So, on our podcast, we talk about a lot of things, the alt space, the AI space, and today I kind of want to focus on education. Is that something that you and I do for a living?
Yeah.
I figured we could have a good conversation here.
Sounds great.
Without too much prep, but at the same time getting pretty deep about it. So one of the things that Donovan and I do is we work in a financial planning program, right? For better or for worse, that's what we call it. Ours happens to be in the College of ACES, which is in agriculture, consumer environmental sciences. And of course, the consumer sciences part of that leads itself to financial planning. So we're positioned in a neat place. And those of you that have been listening for a few seasons, you may not know, but our program is in the top 10% size-wise nationwide. And so you hit that 200 mark and you kind of launch into that top 10%. There are certainly bigger programs out there, but it is nice to be mentioned among those from both a get firms to hire your student standpoint and support the program a little bit. So, I teach our capstone class and I teach a FINRA licensing class. And I teach a very large version of an online personal finance class. Donovan, what do you teach?
Yeah. Well, so my counterpart to Craig's online personal finance class that he teaches, which is truly massive. I mean, Craig, it's pretty big. The actual details on how many students take that class. I teach the in-person component. And that's one of the things I think has been interesting and unique about the University of Illinois, has been, and led by your efforts, Craig, to embrace the online potentials. So we kind of have mirror images. We have the online component of Introduction to Personal Financial Planning, but we also have the in-person component, which I teach each semester. In addition to that, I also teach our risk management and insurance planning class, as well as a retirement and benefits planning class. And beginning in the fall of last year, which will continue in fall of 2025, I also teach a class called Money and Happiness. And this class really explores how can we be happier with our money? Now, it has a flavor and a gear towards how can advisors help their clients be happier with their money, but it actually is a class for all students. So we get students in there from all different majors. And so we do make sure that even if students don't have a background or let's say ambitions to be professional financial advisors at some point, they can still come to the class without that background and understanding and leave with some key takeaways for how they could maybe be a little bit happier with their money.
So give me a few takeaways. I haven't sat in your class. I know it is extraordinarily highly rated. I know that part. But tell me, what are some takeaways to be happier with money?
Well, I think that there's some surprising things. And there are some very key here are decisions that you can make. But let's start maybe with some of the surprising things. So a lot of people are fascinated, as I am, with the relationship between income and happiness.
Okay.
Now, if you look at the scientific literature when they're talking about happiness, they'll refer to this as subjective well-being.
Okay.
Well, actually, let me step back and say that there's a few different ways that happiness is thought of and measured. Commonly, you'll see it described as subjective well-being, but the actual measurements themselves could be things like positive affect. What's positive affect? Positive affect is simply positive emotions.
Okay.
But another way that happiness is measured is by asking people, imagine that there's a ladder with zero that's, that has 10 steps, 0 to 10. 10 represents the best possible life that you could live. 0 is, worst possible life. And they'll ask people to rate their lives based on that ladder. And then that score can be a type of measure for happiness. Now, Craig, you're sitting there thinking, why in the world is Donovan telling me all these things? I asked him for some simple key takeaways.
No, these are good takeaways.
The reason why is because the interesting literature on income and well-being actually compares positive affect and also this rating scale. So we call that life evaluation. How well do you feel like you're actually living your life? Around 2010, Daniel Kahneman, who probably many listeners will remember, famous economist, writer of Thinking Fast and Slow, he and Angus Deaton produced some research that suggested that happiness or income can improve happiness, but only to a certain extent. Now, what the literature said at the time was that once you get to about $75,000, this is probably where actually a lot of the listeners are like, oh yeah, I think I've heard of this. The literature said that, their study said that once you get to about $75,000 per year, your happiness measured by positive affect, so positive emotions, it starts to taper off. So you start to have a plateau effect. So below 75,000, as you increase in income, there is an corresponding increase in positive effect. But at that $75,000 threshold or so, it really starts to taper off. Now, the interesting thing, though, was that individuals' life evaluation, so again, we go back to that ladder score, as their income increased, they still evaluated their lives better. So you had this kind of interesting tension where individuals are saying, yeah, I'm not really necessarily experiencing more positive emotions, but I'm, evaluating my overall life more favorably. So, what is $75,000 in 2025? 2025 is going to be somewhere around like $110,000.
Okay.
So if you're taking that and you could say, okay, well, case closed. I know that more income isn't going to actually translate into more happiness. But you and I, who have a little bit of background in social science and research, know that findings previously may not be conclusive. And in fact, in 2023, Matthew Killingsworth, in conjunction with Daniel Kahneman again, and another researcher named Barbara Mellers, they teamed up for an adversarial research collaboration, revisiting this idea of income and well-being. And guess what? The findings were a little bit different.
Oh.
So based on the new findings, it actually told a different story, which has to do with where people lie on the happiness distribution. And so let me see if I can unpack this. So what their research found was that as your income increases, for most people, happiness tends to increase as well.
Okay.
However, it does not do so for the least happy among us.
Interesting.
So again, from a happiness distribution standpoint,
so where you start matters.
Where you are as an individual, what your happiness level is on that happiness distribution. If we have the least happy person in the world and the most happy person in the world, where you land on that seems to matter as it relates to how income impacts your happiness. And so what they saw was that more money did translate to more happiness for everybody except for the least happy people. The 15 percentile or so people on the very bottom end of the happiness distribution, where again they did see that plateau effect. Now, before anyone who's listening to this leaves and says, okay, the message that Donovan just preached here is that if I want to be happier, assuming that I'm not, the 15 percentile or less,
we'll call
happiness.
that the Scrooge.
Yep.
So if you're not
assuming
Scrooge,
I'm not a Scrooge,
yeah.
Well, Donovan's saying I should really just go out and make more money, and that's going to make me happier. But the reality is, and this is highlighted by the Killingsworth, Kahneman, and Mellor's paper, the interesting thing is, and again, I'm fascinated by the relationship between income and happiness myself, but the actual relationship itself is very weak. And so while it is statistically significant, the magnitude or strength of the relationship is actually quite small. In other words, a way of describing this is that for someone that's earning a relatively modest income and someone who's earning, let's say, like $250,000 per year, the actual difference in their overall happiness scores, it's actually fairly modest.
So they're very well other drivers of happiness are impacting this, right?
Thank you. That's really, really key. That's actually one of the, if we talk about main findings from this class, I think that it is interesting to explore relationships between income and well-being, but there are actually much bigger things that we can do that will, let's say, be a bigger bang for our buck if we're hoping to move happiness in the right direction.
One of the elements that immediately comes to mind from both my experience teaching and experience in life is when we talk to retirees. So often the conversation might be a financial one to start, right? Yeah. We start in a financial space about what will retirement look like? What kind of financial elements do I have there, right? Social Security or their pensions? How much money can I take out of my accounts and still sustain and meet my other goals?
Yeah.
But from what you and I were just talking about, it does reinforce that the conversation itself is more about, well, what is a fulfilling? What is satisfaction? Mm-hmm. What brings you joy?
Yeah.
And so when we talk about retirement, I think the articles you just mentioned and the research you've been doing kind of lean into the joy part, right? Because how can we set up retirement for a consumer or client that brings them joy? And that may actually be as or more important than being able to generate an extra $500 a month. Because yes, the $500 a month has some incremental increase in happiness, but perhaps if we're living a fulfilling, rewarding life with family, that may be more so.
Yeah. Which is why it's so important for financial advisors to really dig into what their clients value. Now, if I'm meeting with you, you're my financial advisor, and I'm a prospective client, so I'm not yet working with you, and I sit down with you, I'm basically primed to divulge to you my financial issues, my financial goals, because you are a financial advisor. Yeah. And the reason why I'm here is probably because I have some sort of pain point. There's something wrong with my taxes, or maybe I heard that there was this backdoor Roth IRA thing, but maybe I screwed it up on my own, right? And so I'm here for some pain point, or
maybe you're about to have a rollover, or
maybe I'm about to retire.
One of those life events that brings people in the door.
Absolutely. And so when I sit down with you, I'm probably primed to talk to you about all these financial things. But I think advisors are increasingly going to need to also help their clients understand, okay, let's talk about the financial things. We absolutely have to do that. I'm a financial advisor. That's my area of expertise. But let's also make sure that whatever goals and objectives we set up, let's really make sure that they're tied in to helping you, let's say, live your best life, right? Helping you not just do well with your money, but also be well, and maybe use your money proactively to be able to increase the chances for that. And the exciting thing is that, the research literature does have some interesting things to say about how you could spend your money that can help you achieve more happiness and satisfaction. I don't know if a lot of advisors are aware of that literature, but I think it's something that we need to be more and more aware of.
So hit me.
Yeah.
How can I
absolutely.
spend my money to be a little happier?
Well, I think one of the best articles to explore on this topic is one by Elizabeth Dunn and her colleagues. And the article itself is called "If Money Doesn't Make You Happy, You Probably Aren't Spending It Right," which I think is just a lovely title.
That's a lovely title, yeah.
So they outline 8 different ways that spending money can improve overall well-being, but I'll just highlight a few of them.
Okay.
Because I think that the biggest one that they highlight is, instead of spending money on material things, spend money on experiences. So here's, I think, a way of thinking about this, Craig. So there's something called hedonic adaptation. And this is a framework for understanding human experiences. Simply put, people respond emotionally to stimulus or experiences. If it's a good thing that happens, you get a positive boost.
Sure.
If it's a bad thing, you get a negative,
Okay.
Emotion.
All
Right?
right.
But over time, you adapt. And, there's been really fascinating literature on this that, would suggest that lottery winners are not happier than controls or things like that. Here's a way of thinking about it.
Because I adapted.
You adapted
to the new
That's
lifestyle.
Right. That's right. So the change resulted in, wow, this is amazing. I can't believe I've won the lottery.
But then we adapt.
You adapt to it
right.
over time.
I think Michael Finke has a really good point to that, right? He has this hypothesis that if you fly in the back of the plane, and occasionally you get bumped up to first class because of you fly light or whatever, that bump up, the satisfaction of the bump up is going to be so much fun. It's going to be so exciting, right? You're going to get Sprite in the cup. You're going to get some warm nuts. You're going to get to pick your feet back. It's going to be this great adventure for you. And you're going to remember that. It's like, oh, what a great flight.
Yeah.
Right? In a sea of business travel.
Yep.
On the other hand, if you fly up front all the time, you lose that magic very quickly. And the inconveniences of, well, these nuts aren't warm enough. There's not enough ice in my Sprite. A plastic glass, right?
Can't believe it.
These sort of absurdities that you wouldn't think, but as your framework changes, I've heard him explain it like that. I think it's a good way that I can understand the concept.
Well, and I think it's a perfect example. And I would actually even broaden it just to say the experience, think back to the last flight you had, regardless of whether you're at the front or the back. Yeah. Rank that on a scale of 0 being the absolute worst experience of your life and 10 being a magical, I can't believe this, right? Now, Craig, I won't ask you right now to rank where your last flight experiences, but my guess is that most of us would say, yeah, it was kind of a bit of a crummy experience. My flight got delayed. The Wi-Fi didn't work. The movie selections were kind of meh. So it wasn't really all that good. If we step back and think about it, though, why don't each and every one of us say that the last flight I had was a 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10? Assuming, of course, that you got departed and landed and you were safe, right?
Landed,
which the vast majority of times is going to be the case. Why don't we think about it that way? Because it's really interesting. As humans, we're not really meant to fly. Right. We are supposed to be on the ground.
Right. That's a good framework.
Maybe
point.
even in the water we do, but it's still a little dicey in the water. But certainly in the air, we are not supposed to be there. But, for those of us who fly, the vast majority of the time, we are having a casual experience sitting down in a chair, maybe watching some TV or checking our emails.
How many 10,000 miles in the air getting us where we want to go?
We're flying at hundreds of miles an hour and, thousands of feet in the air. And, again, most of us would probably say, yeah, it was kind of a lame experience. I didn't really like it. That's hedonic adaptation in play. Right. We've adapted to the experience of flying. It's a miracle that we do it.
But we've adapted to it. And if you went and took 1920s, one of us, 1920s professor, you threw them on a plane, it would just be mind-boggling.
Yeah. I mean, the first flight occurred barely more than 120 years ago. That's crazy. In the context of human existence, that's, nothing. And so getting back to my first point, experiences, by experiences rather than material things. We talked about hedonic adaptation because people adapt pretty quickly to material things, right? That phone in your pocket, that first smartphone you got, you were pretty pumped, right? Wow, that's so cool. If you had an Apple phone,
I would play Angry Birds.
Oh, dude, Angry Birds, absolutely.
So happy with it.
Yeah. There was a different bird game that I think got outlawed pretty quickly.
Right.
Well, I can't remember the name of it, but anyways, games on phones, right? Yes, but now, we're probably either don't think about our phone that much, or it's a little bit of an annoyance. Like maybe we're like, oh man, like I'm addicted to this thing.
Or it just becomes something you're afraid of losing.
Or so there's some negative sides, right?
Yeah.
Right. So material possessions provide a temporary boost, but then they're going to fade into the background.
They are.
Now, the interesting thing about experience is that there's kind of a threefold benefit. So, if you're going to go on a trip, let's say you're going to go on a family trip. Craig, you're a family guy. I know that you love your family.
I do.
And you do some traveling with them, I'm sure. If you book a trip, you get the benefit of looking forward to it.
It's
so
true.
there are anticipatory benefits to thinking about those trips ahead, or an event or whatever it is. You have an experience that you're going to do, and you can think about it in advance. The other benefit is that, you actually have the experience itself, and you can savor, be present in that moment. You can enjoy it while it's happening. The third benefit, again, two of these benefits are actually related time travel. The third benefit is that you get to look back and think about that experience and say, wow, how lucky I was to be able to go do this thing with my kiddos, right? That was amazing. How lucky my wife and I were able to do this XY thing
together,
right?
Yeah.
So experiences provide a lot of benefit. And they are also, even if it's the same experience, let's say that you and I, we're hanging out and like we decide that every week we're going to go to the same restaurant, we're going to hang out.
Sure.
We could still derive a lot of satisfaction and enjoyment from that experience because it's going to be a little bit new every time.
Right.
Even if we get the same food, but we didn't have to, right?
As opposed to if we both bought nice toasters.
If we both bought nice toasters, right? You and I went out and we bought toasters every time we got together.
No. I mean, like the utility of the experience is greater than maybe better stocking our respective kitchens.
Absolutely.
Right. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Absolutely. And that's, very good point. Very good point. So we can have new experiences every time, even if it is, so to speak, the same experience. Right. Maybe we go on a walk.
But we can still look forward to it.
Right. The conversation is a little bit different. Right. Maybe there's a new person that we bring to the group. All those things can be different. And so experiences can be much more powerful than purchases. Here's another thing that's interesting. Researchers have looked at this and they've done a study with college students. They gave college students money. And they asked college students. Now I might be mixing up the gist a little bit. The punchline is going to be the same. So they asked college students, okay, if someone gave you a windfall, sum of money, would you derive more enjoyment through spending that money on yourself, or would you derive more enjoyment if you spend that money on others? Now the college students at the time said, I think I'd probably, I kind of want to spend this money on myself. I think I would derive more enjoyment through actually spending on myself. Now, when they actually go out and researchers go out and they give the money to the college students, whether it's like a $5 bill or a $20 bill, and they randomly assign them. So they're forcing them to spend this windfall a certain way.
Sure.
The ones that are forced to spend it on themselves versus the ones that are forced to spend on others, the ones that are forced to spend the money on themselves actually report more enjoyment and more satisfaction in doing that than those who are spending the money on themselves. So spending money on others, that's called pro-social spending.
Okay.
Pro-social spending results in greater happiness and satisfaction.
Probably enhance relationships and those things as well.
Amen, my friend. It's almost like you've read the study yourself.
Yeah,
so this is, if we kind of, I don't know, if this is probably as good a time as any to talk about like the main thing, as I've thought about this class and as I've explored the research literature, and we think about the biggest bang for your buck for improving happiness, it's improving relationships. It's strong relationships. And I think that the pro-social spending thing actually is one of the reasons why that's the case, because you're spending money on others. It gives you maybe a sense of a greater connection to the social fabric that you exist in, or maybe you're spending money on people that you actually know, and so you're in that way strengthening relationships. But there's a wonderful study. It's the Harvard Study of Adult Development, and the director of that study, Robert Waldinger, did a TED Talk a number of years ago. And what they found in that study was that the single biggest factor for happiness and well-being for individuals was their relationships.
Sure.
More important than income, more important than work, accomplishments, anything else, it was the quality of relationships. And when I think about that and I think about how we can spend money, it occurs to me that if we're interested from a happiness standpoint, now this kind of gets back to like what you're talking about, you know, advisors sitting down with their clients, and they're helping them map out retirement. One of the things you brought up was, okay, is now advisors should do what's in their client's best interest. And I think that does entail helping them maximize. But I think that we can get so narrowly focused on maximizing sometimes that we're not also thinking about the human element of things. And so yes, while maybe there's absolutely is a place for a conversation on how can we, maximize your income here? Can we squeeze out, another $500 per month or something like that? I think it's also important for advisors as well as consumers generally to think about making investments in their relationships. And so when we are, many of us put a lot of time and energy, focus into things like what's the best performing investment. And certainly a lot of us think about our careers a whole lot. We think about our professional experience.
We do.
But maybe, we should think about, are we thinking, strategizing, and being careful about our relationships the same extent that we are those other professional endeavors, which I think is something, if we can elevate that a little bit more, I think it would result in a lot more people saying, hey, I think I am a little bit happier than I was before.
I really enjoy that conversation, Donovan. And I'd like to add to the convo, in my career, working with a few advisors here and there that pigeonhole themselves in the high net worth space, for good or for bad. When someone describes themselves in that context, as I work with high net worth clients or individuals, there's a consistent theme that I found in the recommendations of gift giving in those families. Okay. So I work with high net worth clients and I don't, Craig doesn't, but if you're an advisor that does, I find over and over again, and I really like this perspective. Instead of giving gifts to kids at holiday times or birthdays, a family experience seems to be a rather popular go of things. We're all going to go to Italy. We're all going to go to the beach. We're all going to do this thing. And the generational wealth then is used for the experience and not the stuff. And I've found personally, as I've talked to advisors that put themselves in that area, I guess there's just more means to have these adventures, right?
Sure.
But one of the things that I think I took with me, and I was talking with an advisor in Omaha a few years ago, and one of the things he was like, that is the gift. And I like this perspective, right? So in his case, the client he was working with, it was literally an Italy trip in the summer, and it was over a period of time. It was a week, and they had rented everything. It was going to be a whole beautiful experience. But that was the gift. So the idea was that the family could go and spend time together and have this great gift, and it was going to be a pretty penny. Yeah. But you can scale that back to the rest of us too.
You can.
And I really like that perspective of, okay, let's have the experience of the beach house in the summer, and we'll rent it. We'll rent a week, and then we'll invite all the kids and their spouses and then their kids, and we'll have this 1 week together. And that's the present, as opposed to everyone getting gift cards to Starbucks that won't have nearly the same effect over time, right? Or the memories, or the relationships being built, the walks on the beach, the shells in the morning with grandma, all those memories. Things that like you had memories too. So I think we can scale it right for most people.
Yeah, I think we can. And some of the things that remind me of this. So, I mean, in our family, now every family is different. I'm not trying to say people should do this just, the way that I have, but as a family, my wife and I have decided for our kids, we're going to do the experience gift for Christmas. And so, for the last number of years, our gift has been, we're going to go skiing.
I love it. I love everything about it.
It's hard to imagine that you can ski in Illinois. We're having this conversation in Chicago right now, but there actually are a few places. So that's fun. But in any case, and of course, our kids, there is not a barren tree. They've got grandparents, and we'll get them a few things too. But the main bulk is this experience. But there's another thing, Craig, is you're talking about, scaling things for the rest of us. Hearkening back again to what the literature says about how we can spend money to derive greater happiness. Another idea is smaller, more frequent purchases as opposed to less or fewer large purchases.
Okay.
Or in other words, a way we might think about this is that it's actually the frequency as opposed to the intensity of an experience that seems to give us a greater happiness boost. So one way that we might think about this, for my family, we could decide that, once a year, we're going to do some huge, expensive vacation.
Adventure.
That's going to be it. And that's going to be it for the entire year. Or
right?
maybe it's, this is we don't do any trips except for every 5 years we do a huge thing,
Okay.
right? And it's intense, it's amazing.
The Disney adventure.
It
Right.
turns out that if we're thinking about how to optimize for happiness, it might be better to do smaller, more frequent trips, right?
Because that gives you to look forward to.
Right.
The adventure.
Yep. And they're happening more often,
the
right?
adventure, look forward to the adventure instead of
That's right.
I'm going to go in 2030.
That's right. And it's a lot more frequent. And so we're having these boosts in our emotion more frequently that provide some power. So again, think about kind of the average person. It doesn't have to be a trip to the Italian Riviera.
Sure.
If you're here in Illinois, there's actually, some really cool places in Illinois, but wherever you live, even if it's a day trip or doing something, having an experience with your family, maybe it's just going out and doing a hike for the day, doing those things more frequently as opposed to saving up for the once a year big bash.
Maybe adds more joy.
It might.
It could.
At least the research literature suggested it would.
Absolutely love that. So I want to pivot as this part of our conversation draws to a close.
Sure.
I want to pivot to tell me as a doctoral student, what has been the most rewarding and challenging part of that journey? It can be the same thing, different things, but how has that been for you?
I will tell you, it has been, the experience as a whole has been quite challenging. As you mentioned, I'm working full time at the University of Illinois. I still serve a much smaller number of clients than I once did before. That should be stated, right? It's kind of like I have a toe in planning to stay relevant. I'm not serving as many clients as I was when I first started, right? I've scaled that back. But it has been a real challenge to be able to balance everything. There's just so many fun, amazing things to do that are interesting that it's often hard for me to say no. Let me cut to the chase here. I think that the purpose of a PhD program is to train you to think a certain way. Mm-hmm. And that training is actually a painful process. It's taxing. It's hard.
It is hard.
It's hard to not jump to conclusions. It's hard to go off of hard not to go off of assumptions, right? We're humans. And so we tend to have biases and heuristics that we're often unaware of.
And we use allegory way too often.
Yes, we do. And a research degree, which is what a PhD, people sometimes, and I'll do this real quick, people sometimes mistake what a PhD is. If you're a certified financial planner, you're like, I want to increase my education. You might go get a master's degree.
Sure.
You might say, once you have that master's degree, I want to continue learning about financial planning. And so I'm going to get a PhD in financial planning.
You go get an LLM in tax.
Many of us,
that's your peak there.
That's right. Many of us don't realize that a PhD in whatever it is actually training you to do research. It's not necessarily training you to, become a better tax planner, so to speak, or, optimize a retirement portfolio. And so again, cutting to the chase here, I think the challenging, but also I think ultimately fulfilling and rewarding aspect of the program is to have the experience of thinking about things a little bit differently, grounding your thinking in theoretical frameworks, and then seeing how can we actually test this model for how it might work in the real world. Again, challenging experience, but ultimately I think one that as I'm approaching my comprehensive exams here in the next couple of weeks, I think, assuming I pass those exams, ultimately will be a rewarding one.
Well, and I'll add down the road a bit, right? Down the road about 15 years from now.
Yeah. Which
I'm
guessing is exactly where you're sitting.
Around that,
yes.
Yeah. I think, that doctorate, it definitely opens doors. I think it teaches you to be objective, to ask good questions, to challenge in a nice way.
Yeah.
I think the hard part from when you get the PhD and then you kind of come out on the other end is, it's very easy to criticize someone else's research. Inevitably, I can go after your sample size. I can go after your methods,
Absolutely.
right? There's no right method. There's no right sample size, right? And I think there's this that you see it in the world around us. There's this I've got my doctorate, now I'm going to open the criticism spigot. And I think that overcoming that can be a little challenging because you start looking at the world differently and then you're like, you can't say that. You can't say that. You can't say that. And so people are going to say what they say. Yeah. But I think down the road then where it plays into teaching, right? Because we've gone through the journey of objectivity in science, and I think you become a much better instructor because you're teaching people research, you're teaching people literature, you're teaching your students in, different aspects of happiness and joy like you're doing now. Yeah. Instead of just saying, well, this is what makes Craig happy or this is what makes Donovan happy. You're actually looking at literature and research, something you probably wouldn't do not having gone through that process and journey. Yeah. So, I think it does increase our ability in the classroom, but it's kind of a bigger picture on why. I don't think it's just, I got my doctorate, now I'm a better teacher, but I think you get there. Yeah. Not to say you're not a good teacher, but I think that's like a journey that people take after.
It's interesting, where I'm at in the evolution of my PhD experience. I almost feel like there's nothing that I know. I don't know if you went through that phase as well, but, you get challenged so much in a PhD program that you really start to think, gosh, like the amount of things that I actually know are like this. Yeah. And I'm, if you're listening, I'm just have like about an inch, but the things that we don't know are just massive. And I think that, I think as being in academia, I think it's absolutely vital. This touches on what you were talking about being mature enough to avoid tearing everything down. I think that it's important as academics to be humble, right? And to recognize that we don't know everything. We don't have it all figured out. I think there's a real danger in getting to a point where you kind of think, okay, I know the way everything works. Is you're not going to be open to new ideas anymore. And the reality is that, things that we think we know are sometimes and actually oftentimes proven wrong. So staying humble, I think along the way is really key too.
I agree. I'll add one thing to that comment. I always thought of it like a little triangle, right? And this is how I would describe it to people. I don't remember where I picked this up from, but so my dissertation was on the influences of compensation bias on annuitization models, right? So like when do we decide to annuitize assets or do fee only assets or, buy something, and how does we get paid impact our decision making? Yeah. Right. And so that I probably know really well. Yeah. Right. That time now. Yep. Does that make me Craig Lemoine, master of annuities? Nope. Yeah. Do I know how today's products work and are built? No, not really. Yeah. Do I know all the compensation models out there? No. But I knew for a brief moment more than anyone else in the world on that one thing. Right. Right. Yep. And so to me, I think when we look at the doctorate, it's that process of learning and building and understanding. And there's going to be a topic, Donovan, that you know better than anyone, right? But it doesn't mean the tangent topics you do. That's right. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't change with time. Yep. But I think you hit on pretty well, like why there are PhDs. And, I think that's it. And I know we're going a little long. But I'll add one more thing. Like when people come to me and they say, I want to teach financial planning, should I go get a PhD? I used to say, yeah. And now I say, I don't know. Because I think with financial planning today, the technical is so important and the tax and the realities of it, right? Yep. That if you go and get a master's of tax and you go ahead and get an RICP or learn about retirement, you're going to be able to teach those fields really well. Yep. And that may be actually better for you than getting a doctorate if research and scholarship isn't what you want to do. Yeah. Right. If the research and scholarship is what you want to do, of course, that's the path. But if it's teaching and you want to be really technically accurate, there's other ways to get there. Yeah. So I've changed my answer. And I think
I think that I would largely agree with that, right? I started here at the University of Illinois with my master's degree in financial planning. Yeah. And fortunately, that was all I needed to open the door. Now, I'm not on hiring committees throughout the country. So, and Craig, you would probably know better than I do if sometimes like the PhD is a box that sometimes just has to get checked to be able to teach at a university.
Depends on where you're teaching.
Right. Depends on where you're teaching. But I think in any case, something that's really helpful that I think you're bringing up is it's really key and really important for people to be clear on the end game, right? If the end game is to be technically accurate and an expert on a particular topic like tax or like retirement planning or let's say insurance planning or fill in the blank for other planning strategies, then the master's degree is going to be a great path.
Yes.
If you are, as you mentioned, thinking, you know what, I want to learn how to do research. And really what I'm passionate about is adding to the body of knowledge that we know about these particular topics. At that point, a PhD can be a good idea. But if you're sitting, with this conversation thinking academia is interesting, is a path I'd like to pursue.
It is.
There is teaching and there is research, right? And depending on the institution, it could be a kind of blend of those, but kind of having an understanding of what you really want to do. Do you want to be a teacher more than a researcher? Do you want to be a researcher more than a teacher? I think is key to understand your path forward from an educational standpoint.
I love that. And while I would love to continue chatting for another hour, I think we're good on time. But Donovan, thank you so much for being on today. I hope everybody enjoyed our twist from alternatives into education, but I think it's an important one. And, it's my podcast, so we're going to do it.
I love it.
So thank you for coming, Donovan.
Thanks for having me, Craig.
Thank you.